Mermaids, you've written about time travel. And so, what inspired you to write When the World Was Ours, which appears on the surface to be a very different kind of book? And can you tell us sort of briefly what the book's about?
Yeah, thank you, Eve, and thank you for the lovely introduction. And if any of you saw anything in the press, on the radio, or even on the regional news with me and my dad together, if you saw any of it, it was down to this wonderful person here, because she ran the most amazing campaign. Um, so, uh, so I think many of you, I don't know if this is very largely the same audience that we had for my dad last week, but I think a lot of you certainly would have been here or know about my dad and know his incredible story. And the part of it that inspired me was the bit where my dad was basically a 4-year-old child living in Vienna, and he went on a ride on a Danube steamer with his father. He very nearly bumped into a woman. She turned out to be there with her husband, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, on a conference in Vienna. And as a result of my grandfather saying to my dad, be careful not to scuff this woman's dress, she and her husband got into a conversation with my grandfather. Such conversation that they missed their stop on the boat. And my grandfather said, look, I'll take you back to your hotel, and but come and meet my wife, come and have her cake. And then the next day he offered to show them around Vienna. So a very lovely, for tiny moment led to a lovely small act of kindness from my grandfather. That led to a letter sometime later from the Joneses to say thank you for the lovely time they'd had. And that letter, 5 years later, when my family was by that time living in Czechoslovakia, desperate to get out of the country because the Nazis were now in Czechoslovakia as well. It was now 1939. They needed an affidavit from somebody in another country. They didn't know anybody until my grandfather came across this letter. And he wrote to the Joneses, and they, excuse me, I think Ed's croakiness has caught on. And they said, yes, of course, we'll do everything. And they did. So many of you will know my dad's story from either last week or from hearing before. But as a writer, I knew, I think I've always known the story, but when I went to Vienna with my dad about 10 years ago, that was the first time when I really thought, I'm going to write a book, not about this, but somehow inspired by this one day. But the thing that always inspired me wasn't so much the events that actually took place, but it was more the kind of the other side of that. Writers often say that, like, the two most important words to a writer are what if. Apart from the end, we like those two words as well. But what if is the phrase that kind of propels your story on. So it was always, for me, it was, what if that moment had never happened? What if my dad hadn't, if my dad hadn't knelt on a chair on a boat? What if Gladys Jones had sat somewhere else? The tiniest change to those events would have just changed everything. And almost certainly my family wouldn't have survived. So, as a writer, it's hard to resist that kind of background, but it's taken me a long time. Like I said, I wrote about mermaids, my mermaid series about Emily Windsnappers, being responsible for most of the things I've done in my life for over the last 15, 18 years. So, there's been things like that in the background, but the story's grown and grown. And then a couple of years ago, I guess I just thought I wanted to take a leap away from my publisher, the expectations, so just everything I was doing, and write purely from my heart. And, my lovely dad wasn't getting any, well, none of us are getting any younger. And I thought, I want to share this with him now. I don't want to, come another 20 years down the line and think, why didn't I do it? So that was, yeah, that was what led to When the World Was Ours coming out, and, why I took such a leap to do it.
And the thing that I really love about the book is it's not just one person's story, it's three people's story. And I think this leads into what you're saying about the what if and thinking about different perspectives. So why did you decide to separate the book into three strands of Max, Leo, and Elsa?
So I don't know if any of you out there love the film Sliding Doors like I do. If you don't know it, it's a film where a woman is coming home from work early because I think she's been fired or something. But anyway, she's coming home from work early, so unexpectedly. And she goes to get on the tube, and she just misses it, and waits for the next one. And then she gets home, she tells her boyfriend what's happened, they get on with their lives. And then it kind of cuts back to that moment, and it changes it slightly. And instead of just missing it, I think somebody forces a door open or stops it from closing, and she just catches it. And in that scenario, she gets home in time to find out that her boyfriend's having an affair. And the two scenarios go in these different ways. And I love films like this. And I've actually written a couple of books that deal with this kind of the tiny moment that changes everything, and a bit of time slip as well. And I thought that was how I wanted to write this book. I thought it was going to be one scenario where the events unfold in a similar way to, you know, what happened to my dad, and then another one that kind of split off. And there was a bit of time slip involved as well. And then I spoke to my agent, and my Catherine Clark, who's like, she's gold standard agent extraordinaire. And she said to me, I wonder what would, in this way that only Catherine can do, she'll pinpoint something. She said, I wonder what would happen if you took the time travel element out of this. And I was like, that's the backbone of the book. What are you talking about? I can't take that out of it. And then the second I got off the phone, I was like, hang on a minute, what if I did take that out? And it was like the entire book just flooded, the ideas all flooded out. And I realized that instead of having this kind of different reality that split off, and like Catherine so rightly said, would have kind of kept on taking us out of the emotional heart of the story, the way to answer that what if question was another character. So I created Leo, whose story, certainly the early part of his story, mirrors very much what happened to my dad in Vienna, and the letter that saves his family, or himself and his mum. And then the answer to the what if question was another character. So that was where Elsa came in, who is a Jewish girl in Vienna who doesn't have that moment of good fortune. And so her story takes much different turns. And then the third what if question really was, what if they hadn't been Jewish? And so then I came up with Max. And so there are three friends who, they're completely innocent. They're 9 years old at the start, they're innocent, it's 1936, and they're on the cusp of their lives changing completely. And Max's story, you know, even though they begin as three equals, he, you know, his father's a Nazi, he's going to join the Hitler Youth, and his story is extremely different in another way.
And I think we're going to have a section from Max. We can do a bit of a reading. Max's characters, yeah, incredibly interesting. But yeah, take it away. Yeah,
I've had a lot of, it's quite interesting actually, because a lot of people have emailed, you know, I've had lovely responses, but a lot of people have said to me that Max was a character that they couldn't stop thinking about. And in a weird sort of way, I think in a way he was a character that allows non-Jewish people to kind of work through their feelings and ask themselves what they might have done in his situation. And, you know, I think he was an interesting character to write, certainly. So this is a scene from the very beginning, when, before everything goes sharply downhill. My dad's experience took place on a Danube steamer, and when we went on a research trip for the book, I was in Vienna, and I was looking for an old-fashioned kind of boat that I could use, and they're not really there nowadays. And then we went, because it'd been a very heavy kind of research trip, so we went for some light entertainment to the fairground. And it was actually it was there that I realized that I was going to reset where the events took place to the Riesenrad. I think my dad's going to correct my pronunciation there. Riesenrad. Is that right, Dad? Okay, that's better. Which is the big wheel. So this is Max's point of view. I'm going to do 3 readings, one from each of the characters. This is Max. Max had never had a day like this, a day filled with so much laughter and happiness. He was sure that if they opened the doors at the top of the ride, he would float even higher than the wheel itself. It wasn't just the laughter that filled him up inside. He could have been anywhere in the world, and it would have been a perfect day, as long as he shared it with his 2 best friends. Sometimes he tried to remember his life without Leo and Elsa. It felt as though they'd been best friends forever. When he did think about life before them, the memories weren't happy ones. He remembered being alone in his bedroom, with his hands over his ears to shut out the sound of his parents arguing. his father ranting and shouting, and his mother trying to calm him down. It was always about the same thing, money. The fact that they never had any since his father had lost his job. Max's mother said they had just enough to live on, but that wasn't good enough for his father. He was too proud to settle for just enough. And so he ranted and raged and blamed everyone except himself. And Max shut himself in his room and covered his ears and waited for the arguments to end. Kindergarten had been no escape. He wished his mother would buy his school uniform from the same shop as everyone else, rather than sew it from cloth that didn't quite match and was always slightly the wrong shape. The other kids laughed at him, and Max learned to manage without needing praise or friends or smiles. By the time his father got a new job and they could afford a proper school uniform, it was too late. The other children saw him as an outcast, a joke. That changed when he met Elsie and Leo. They didn't judge him, and they were the only friends he needed. But he wished his father would smile like this English couple, or talk to him and tease him like Leo's father did. He wasn't sure he could remember the last time his father had even looked at him. Nowadays, he always seemed to be at work. Even in the evenings, he was at meetings or with people from his office. He never talked about his job, but then he never talked to Max much at all, other than to criticize him for one thing or another. So days like these, times with his best friends, they were the most precious things that Max had or could ever want.
Max is such a complicated, interesting character, and I feel like we could talk about him for an hour. But I'm going to move us on to Elsa, who is kind of the sliding doors alternative life to your dad's story, which inspired Leo. So Elsa's is the saddest story in the book, and she is named for your great aunt Elsa, whose name you found in the Book of Names during your research trip. This was in 2019,
Yeah.
Not that old. In 2019, before the world closed up, you went on this long research trip throughout Europe. What did you see? What did you find on that trip?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on research trips for lots of my books, and when you're writing about mermaids, it means you go to places where there's beaches and caves, and I've been to the Arctic and I've been to Bermuda, and it was amazing. But the research for this book was never going to be kind of sitting on the beach writing up notes after looking at pretty fish with a snorkel on. And I was actually really nervous even before we went, because we planned, Laura, my wife, and I were planning to go for 3 weeks. We were going to go across 5 countries, so Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Holland. We were planning to go to 5 concentration camps. In the end, we went to 4. We went to museums, synagogues, walking tours. It was full on. It was a very full on tour, and it was tough. We went to the first concentration camp we went to was Dachau, where I came away feeling this huge grief and sadness. And we went to Mauthausen concentration camp. I don't know if people have been there, but there was something about that in particular that kind of enraged me. We went through, it was beautiful, glorious weather, and it was in the autumn. We went through these beautiful forests up this gorgeous road, and at the top of it is this scene of mass murder. And there were fields we had guided tours on our phones, and there were fields to the side where the tour told us that the SS guards used to invite the local people to come and play football. And it was the contrast between what happened there and the way that they saw it, and the way that, you had this sense of the local people knowing, that people say, oh, we didn't know, but, it didn't feel that way. And the rage I felt was incredible. And then we went to Auschwitz and Birkenau, and that pretty much sort of broke the rest of me. It was tough. It was a really difficult thing to do, but I don't think I could have written this book in the way that I had, or put the emotion and the facts and the detail into it, excuse me, in the way that I did without it. I mean, even things like, we went on a walking tour in Munich. The tour was called Hitler in the Third Reich, and I knew that I had to do a tour like this. But I was nervous, but we looked it up on TripAdvisor, and there were loads of reviews saying how respectful it was. But when I looked at them again afterwards, I noticed that they named their guide, and none of them had the name of the guide that we had. And he felt a bit too sympathetic to the Nazis, kind of showed these buildings and talked proudly about how the Nazis had rebuilt them because they were so clever that they'd made these pictures beforehand. And then he kind of, when he was talking about Kristallnacht, he framed it very much as, you know, Hitler was being interrupted when he was having a lovely meal, and those Jews had killed this diplomat, and so this was what they did. And it was, and actually, a couple of times I kind of raised my hand and I said, I really don't agree with the way you're framing this. I'm feeling very uncomfortable. And he took me aside in the middle of the tour when we were having a toilet break and said, if you're going to keep on asking me questions, I'm going to ask you to leave the tour. And I actually burst out laughing and I said, are you seriously telling me that on a tour about the Nazis, if I don't agree with you, I have to leave? And anyway, I ended up in tears. All the people around us were saying, please don't leave. You know, we like what you're saying, you know. And in the end, we left because we were too upset. And I phoned my sister Caroline in pieces, and she just said, use it. Use these feelings you have and put them in your book. That's what you do. You're a writer. So, you know, so things like that happen. But it was a very tough experience. But you know, I needed to do it, and you know, not just for the book, but to honor my history and to find out about my history and to connect more with my Jewish identity, I suppose. So, yeah, it was it was a very important thing to do, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I remember being incredibly shocked when you told me that story about the guide, and I just naively couldn't believe it. And I think it just proves why we need this book, why we need to tell the story. I mean, we'll go into that more at the end of the questions, but it's just so important. And I think the next reading is from Elsa, who is a very difficult story to read about her, because she is one of the victims of huge tragedy, and it's really hard to read, but very important.
Yeah, so Elsa was, I've never really felt, you know, I've written, I can't remember, you said how many books I've written at the start. It's 20-something books, and I've never really felt the way I feel about Elsa, about any of my other characters, which is this kind of desire to protect her and this compassion and this sadness. And yeah, so when we were at Auschwitz, we went, it was my cousin, Lisa, actually had said to me, make sure you go to see the Book of Names. It's not on the tour, but we went in afterwards and we found it. And it's, you know, it's the length of a room, and it's the Jews all the Jews that they could find the names of, who were murdered in the Holocaust. And we found Elsa, and I told Dad, and, you know, and he said, he said, because no one in the family had seen her name there before. And he sent me an email saying, because I said, Laura held the book open, and I said Kaddish over her name, and he said thank you from our family, and it was very moving. And so to name one of my characters after Elsa felt a bit like I was honoring my family and my history and the past and the millions of Jews who suffered Elsa's fate. Okay, so this is a short chapter of hers. Excuse me. This is just sort of in the middle of the book when Elsa and her brother Otto, I've just been told that the parents are sending them away on the kinder transport. I rub my eyes and stare at my parents. You can't be serious, Otto says. You're sending us away. This has to be some kind of a joke. Vati turns towards my brother. Do we look like we're joking, Otto? He asks, his voice husky and dark. But things aren't really so bad, are they? I ask. How bad do you want them to get, Elsa? Vati replies. It's not enough that neither you nor Otto is allowed to join the youth groups with all the other children. Not enough that I have no work, that you are not allowed to walk in the park, ride your bicycles, go swimming. Not enough that our friends are disappearing on a daily basis. Mutti puts her hand on his arm. Darling, go gently on the children. They don't need to think about all this. But Stella, that's just it. They do need to think about all this. We have to face what's happening. We are facing it, Mutti replies calmly. I'm with you on this decision, but still, we don't need to ram it down their throats. Vati lets out a breath. Very well, he says, but the decision is made. We just have to sit tight and wait till we are given our date. Mutti is crying openly now. My babies, believe me, if we thought we had any other options, we would take them. But why can't you come with us? Otto asks. My big brother, the one who always tries so hard to be tough and strong and capable, sounds as scared as me. They won't let us, Vati replies. But you children have a chance. Mutti kneels in front of Otto and me. She takes our hands. You are the most important things in our lives, she says. There is nothing I care about as much as you. Then why are you sending us away? I ask. My throat hurts and I can barely get the words out. Because we want you to live, that he says simply.
Wow. So you said that during the research trip and sort of seeing Great Aunt Elsa's name, it was just a hugely emotional experience. And you mentioned that it sort of impacted you in terms of your Jewish identity. How much did it change you? Did it make you think about things in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a strange thing, and I'm not kind of religious in the kind of official sense of the word. I'm quite agnostic. I'd love to believe in God. I'd love to believe in all sorts of things that I kind of a little bit do, but I kind of a little bit question. And I've always thought, and I'm gay, and there's things that in my whole life have made me feel sort of on the edge of or outside of the sort of traditional Jewish community. And I think if I was growing up now rather than when I did grow up, I think there's an awful lot more scope to sort of be Jewish and belong to a community in all sorts of different ways, much more than when I think it was a bit more kind of straightforward when I was growing up. And anyway, there's lots of reasons. I've sort of always felt that being Jewish has been important, a really important part of who I am, but I've never really I've never felt like I quite understand exactly in what way I fit in, sort of thing. And doing this trip, it really kind of gave me some answers. Even if the answers, some of them were just more questions, it made me kind of connect with my heritage, my history, and my family even more. And I think that felt like such a kind of a bonding feeling, really. Even Laura, my wife, who's not Jewish, it made her feel connected as well. When we had that awful experience in Munich, we kind of desperately, we were like, where's the synagogue? Where's the synagogue? And we kind of got there, and it was like we were kind of thirsty people out in the desert, and drink the water of our Jewishness, and blow the shofar that they've got out here. And it was like, it was incredible. And so it made me connect to my heritage, my identity much more. I sent a text to my niece, Frankie, who works in a Jewish school. She's a teacher in a Jewish school, and actually she did a bit of training as a rabbi for a short time. And I sent her a text saying, why does it have to be that, like, to feel Jewish, it's got to be all this negative stuff that connects us? Why does everyone always hate us? And all these things. And she said, I ask myself, and I am asked this question every day. And then I spoke to a very wise rabbi who said, being Jewish isn't about being able to answer these questions. The act of you asking yourself all these questions is part of the Jewish identity in itself, and that this questioning and this grappling with it all is part of it. And I think there was an awful lot about it in many ways that made me connect much more and feel more comfortable. Like, yes, of course, it can be a deep part of my identity, and I don't have to believe, sort of go along with every word I read for any particular, festival or anything like that. There are a million ways to be Jewish, or more than, probably as many different ways as there are Jews. So it really gave me that connection back in a way, and that was wonderful. That was probably the biggest thing, and then, shortly after we came back, it was only a few months before COVID started and the lockdown, everything. So, it wasn't like I could start going to shul or anything like that, because, everything's been closed for the last year. So, but yeah, it certainly kickstarted some deeper thinking for me. I feel like my screen's frozen a bit.
And did it feel, oh, it might be my internet. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Did it feel healing or therapeutic to write the book, or was it just pain and difficult, or both?
But yeah, I think it was definitely both. So I'm a big plotter, so I plotted for months before we went. So I knew the outline of the book, and then the research that I did over the course of the year through books, through the internet, and then through the research trip, helped to fill in a lot of the blanks. But when it came to writing the first draft, yeah, it was quite therapeutic, really. It was like the whole thing just flooded out of me. I couldn't stop writing. I spent 5 weeks. That's all it took to write the first draft, 5 weeks, which I've never done before. And it was just 5 weeks of sitting in my office like the kind of stereotypical image of a writer in the garret that doesn't stop to eat or drink or get dressed. Not that anyone gets dressed nowadays, but you know, back then we writers were still the only ones that had pajamas as our daily uniform. I think most people have joined us now, but yeah, no, I couldn't stop, and it was like I had to get to the end. I couldn't stop until I'd got all the way to the end. It was quite cathartic experience, definitely.
So we're gonna open for questions in maybe like 5 or 10 minutes, just in case anyone wants to have some questions bubbling away. But my next question is, the book was published for children. I mean, we are a children's publisher, children sort of 12 plus, but clearly adults have loved it as well. It's meant so much to them, those adult readers. But why is it important for us to talk to young people about this horrific history? And what do you want young people to take away from it?
I mean, I think, you know, right, here's an admission from me. I got an E in my history O level, so I wasn't very good at history. Actually, my old history teacher recently sent me a friend request on Facebook, and I'm a bit too nervous to accept it in case he wants to tell me off for misbehaving in his lessons. But yeah, so I never set out to write a history book. I didn't want it to be a history book. I wanted it to be a book that felt relevant today. You know, I don't think I need to tell anyone here that things are still difficult. There's still anti-Semitism, there's racism, there's a rise in fascism. The world's got a lot of really bad stuff going on. And as much as children reading about what happened then, I also really would love this book to be a sort of conversation opener to discuss things that are happening now. And if I could just tell you one example of exactly the kind of thing that I would love to happen, that did happen about a week ago. I don't know if people saw, but there's a Conservative MP put a tweet out saying that every school should have a Union Jack flying. And if the schools don't believe that they should, then they should be educated about it. And a head teacher of school copied this tweet and then wrote above it, I recently read a scene in Kessler's When the World Was Ours about nationalism in a school in the 1930s. And that scene has haunted me ever since I read it. And reading this now takes me straight back to that chapter. And I felt like this is what I want my book to be doing. I mean, I don't want to think that there are MPs out there saying, we must teach our children the causes of, no, not the causes, we must teach our children to celebrate their nationalism. I don't want that happening. But anything like that is happening, for a head teacher to say, look, children, these are the dangers of that happening. Read this book and let's talk about it. That's where I want the book to fit in. So, you know, yeah, unfortunately, I think the conversations are very much needed today, but that's where I'd like my book to fit in. Eve, I think you've frozen again.
And I think the label of historical fiction makes it sound a lot further away because it's, oh, I have frozen. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Oh. Hello?
Hello.
All right, well, it's good that I've frozen because we're going to ask you to read from Leah's story now, which is, yeah, a more positive ending, I think. This is the most positive story.
Yeah, so I'm going to just read a short chapter from Leo's point of view. And this is, you know, it's a good place to end on, I think, because this brings it back to the sort of the starting point of the inspiration from my dad's life. It's just after the sort of halfway through the book when Leo and his mum have just received good news. I couldn't stop staring at the document in my hand. Is it real? I asked. We can truly leave Austria. I didn't want to let myself hope. Just that day, we'd been spat at twice while we waited in the street to be seen. And on the way home, I'd been tripped up by a boy just to make his friends laugh. And they did. People laughed at us every day now. They called us names whenever they saw us. They delighted in letting us know our place in Nazi-run society. Not that we needed reminding. Our place was at the bottom of the heap. Nothing came below the Jews. It's real, Mama insisted, as she took a chair into her bedroom. Here, help me reach the cases. I followed her into her room and held the chair while she climbed up to reach the shelf at the top of her wardrobe. She pulled down 2 cases. We were allowed 1 each, 1 case each to fit our whole lives into. By the end of the week, our home would officially belong to the Nazis, along with everything in it. All we would own would be the contents of these cases and our passports with the big red J for Jew stamped on them. I took my case to my bedroom and began to pack. I opened the drawer by my bed and took out the photograph from my 9th birthday. It was hard to believe it was only 3 years ago. It felt like a lifetime. The carefree smiles on our faces. I couldn't imagine smiling so freely like that ever again. The last happy day of my childhood and the day we had met Mr. and Mrs. Stewart. A tickle and a chase and a trip over a lady's foot, and to make up for it, an extra ride on the Ferris wheel and a piece of sacatorte. That was what we had given them. And in return, they were offering us a whole new life.
I think that's a great section to end on, because the book is fundamentally about hope. It's about kindness. And it's about passing on that story to other people. And it's make a huge impact.
I think you've frozen again, Eve. Oh.
I wonder, Liz and Eve, whether just in the hiatus there, we've got a question.
Don't worry. I think
in the
we
chat.
should open for questions.
Yeah, I think we were going to end on that and then go over to questions anyway. So while Eve battles with her internet, Ed, do you want to maybe take over fielding the questions?
I'll fill in for Eve for a moment, and then she can come back when she feels she's sorted. We've got a question from Sarah Martin, and she says, I'm interested to know what made you decide to write Elsa's story in the present tense, but Max's and Leo's in the past.
So yeah, well spotted, and I love talking about this. I don't know if you're a teacher, but I sort of, one of the things I was hoping or imagining was classrooms of English teachers discussing questions just like this with their children. So Leo's story is told in the first person in the past tense, and Elsa's is in the first person in the present tense, and Max's is actually told in the third person. So Leo and Elsa, I use the first person, but with Leo's story, the past tense, because there's a sense of him looking back and telling his story, almost from today, looking back and telling it. Elsa's, without wanting to do any big spoilers on the book, Elsa pretty much only has the present day. And so her present is I wanted to be as close to her as possible. And first person present is about as close as you can get to a character. But also there's a sense that she's only living in the day, and the question of whether she's, how much of a future she's going to have. And then it came to Max, and, as well as wanting to do different forms of points of view, just from the writerly point of view, perspective. With Max, I just felt like I wanted to separate him a little bit. I wanted that tiny veil. It is in the third person. It's very close third person, so we do get in his head and we know what he's thinking, what he's doing. But I just felt that, almost for my own sake, I wanted to just have a little bit of distance. I wanted my readers to have a little bit of distance. I didn't really want them identifying right in the heart of a boy who's going to go quite deep into the world of the Nazis. And it was just quite it was almost like a protective gesture on my part, just to have that tiny veil, tiny bit of separation between us and him.
I was wondering, you quoted a teacher who said that, when they saw the quote about the Union Jack, and then it took them right back to the book. Have you had any other feedback from teachers and schools?
Yeah, and it's funny because there's always different things that you want with your books. I used to do this thing with some author friends where we'd say, if you could win all the awards that there are and only sell a few hundred books, or you could sell 1 million books and not get any critical acclaim, which would you choose? And there's different answers at different times. And I sort of been playing with my own mind about what do I want from this book, and I realized that the biggest thing I want from this is to feel is the idea of adults and young people talking about it together, so in classrooms. And so every time I get an email from a teacher, it means the world to me. And I have to say, I've had some really lovely responses on Twitter, on Instagram, even email. The reviews that I've had have been lovely. So yeah, I mean, it's been a very warm response. And I've had a couple of there's one lovely teacher that I've been in email contact with who is a year 6 teacher. I've been very clear that I think this book should be 12 plus. And he teaches year 6, so they'll be coming up to 11 at the end of the year. And we had a conversation about this, and I said, you know, I strongly believe that I don't want to traumatize children because it does get very upsetting. But I also believe I have to trust that you know your young people, and especially the end of year 6, you know, if you believe they're mature enough and you're the gatekeeper, then it's up to you to make those decisions. And so I've been having lots of conversations like that with teachers. My publisher, Simon & Schuster, have made a teacher's pack, actually, which is incredible. It's free. It's a free resource. If anyone wants to be able to use this with young people, then you know, I'm happy to share the link with you, Ed, because it's an incredible resource. So yeah, lovely responses from teachers.
Well, please do sort of share that resource, because we interact with a lot of schools around Judaism and now also Holocaust education as well. And we've also preparing our own school book as well, which is on a very different perspective. But so yes, please do share that. Please, if anybody else has got a question, if you know how to use your digital hand, because with so many people on the screen today, we might just miss you, or put something in the chat if you can't do that. And if you want to ask you a question in person, we'll call you in.
If you want to ask why I'm so bright red, it's because I've got a heater on and the sun's shining through that window.
Yes, I had to open the window because it was really hot in here and there's no heating on, which is, you know, we're April, it could be like that, but it's a bit of a contrast, isn't it? Yeah. Do you think you're going to go on to do more books along this style rather than your previous style?
Yeah, it's a very strange space to be in, to be honest, Ed, because you know, it's very different. At the same time as this book coming out, I've also been working on some early readers for my US publisher, based on the Emily Winslet book. So I'm kind of having these 2,000-word books of mermaids, like having these lovely adventures for 6-year-olds at the same time as kind of delving deeply into this. But yes, mainly because I've actually loved working with Simon & Schuster so much, I definitely want to stick with this. And also because it's quite hard to write a book like this and then turn away from this kind of thing. And I like working with this, writing for this age group. So yes, I'm about 2 days away from sending something to my agent, which she's going to be taking to Simon & Schuster. So if you ask me the same question again in a month, I can give you a proper answer.
Well, we look forward to that. I mean, it sounds very interesting. Do you think your book has a role within, you know, the generations are now reducing, and the number of survivors, refugees who are alive is very small, and soon they won't be there at all. Do you think, I mean, I know you were really sort of probably, this book comes from a very personal place in the first instance, but do you think it has a role within future generations to actually carry the story forward?
I mean, yeah, I would love to think that. And, you know, in a very personal way, my dad works with the Holocaust Educational Trust, and he gives talks in schools, or, you know, he does them on Zoom at the moment, but when life is normal, he goes into schools, and he is one of a sadly dwindling number of people who can talk in real life about experiences that they had then. And so we have to have some way of carrying these stories on. And I feel proud and honoured to be able to have a book that can continue that story. So yes, I do hope that this will continue to be shared as the years go by. Definitely, yeah. I think it's all about, you know, passing on that baton, and there's a sense of that in my book at the end of the book as well. I think we have to keep on passing it on, definitely.
So did you always aim the book at young readership, or did you anticipate there would have an older readership?
You know, when I wrote it, I didn't really think at all about what it was going to be. I felt like part of it was that I left my publisher of about 17 years, I think, and I wanted to just kind of start afresh. I didn't want to have any expectations. So I didn't even know who I was writing it for. And in fact, Laura said, and my mum and my dad both quite early on, I think, said they didn't think that this was even a children's book. And in fact, my publisher, when the paperback comes out, I think they're planning to move at least partly into the area of a sort of crossover market, because they feel that it does appeal to adults as well as young people. So, you know, I've written for young people for 20 years, so I suppose that is where I'm coming from. I like the idea that, you know, we've got something to say to the next generation, and, you know, and hopefully help them to make decisions about what they'd like to do with themselves. You know, we've already done what we've done to the world, and I like, you know, the books are, like Eve said earlier, it's a lot about hope, and I have a lot of hope that, you know, the next generation coming up will do better, maybe in some ways, than some of the things that we've done. So that's partly why I like writing for young people. I also like adventure, action, characters, and short sentences, and not very long words. So that works. That means I'm suitable as a writer for young people as well, I guess.
Going back to something else you said while you were talking, David Breckel asks, the tour guide who you disagreed with his perspective, he says, would you have liked to hit him? I wondered what, you know, I think sometimes we all rile up inside and feel like we'd like to be aggressive towards people, but what did that make you think about the whole situation of perhaps not just that tour guide, but maybe other tour guides who are giving a perspective which you feel is just wrong?
Do you know, it was actually the opposite. I felt really vulnerable, and I felt scared, and I felt small. It didn't make me feel kind of angry and powerful and I'm going to get you back. It had the absolute opposite effect. We left the tour, I was in tears. I left the tour crying and in pieces, you know, and I didn't know what to do with my feelings. And like Eve said earlier, that she naively kind of thought, this can't have happened. And at the same time as experiencing it, I felt that as well. It was almost a denial. It was like, I must be imagining it. I must be imagining it. He can't really be saying this. He can't really be blaming the Jews for Kristallnacht. You know, there was another point when he said, you know, he was talking about Hitler as a failed artist, and that had led to everything that had happened. And he said, if I could go back to one moment in history, I'd go back to the point where Hitler didn't get into art school, and I'd let him into art school, because, you know, then basically this, you know, this wouldn't have happened because this came out of his rejection. And that was one of the points that I'd interject. I put my hand up and I said, we live in St. Ives. There's a lot of failed artists in St. Ives, and or a lot of unsuccessful artists in St. Ives, and none of them go on to be murderous dictators. And it was, you know, it was these weird things that he said. But no, I came away feeling small, scared, vulnerable, upset. And I suppose it was a good reality check that, you know, we can quite often live in bubbles where we kind of gravitate towards people who feel the same way as we do about things and have the same values. And we can sort of shut off to the fact that, you know, there's a lot of people out there who really don't. And this was a bit of a wake-up call that I needed while writing this book, that, yeah, they're still out there. There's a lot of them around.
And we've got a question from Anne coming in. Do you think there is more room for books for children that explore gender?
Oh, to explore gender.
Very
Gorgeous.
different question.
Yeah, that came from the side, didn't it? Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, gender is being talked about in very big ways at the moment. You know, all our thoughts about sexuality that we were talking about maybe 20 years ago, a lot of those kind of things those conversations are happening around gender identity today. There's an awful lot going on in the world of children's books and young adult books. In that arena in particular, there's some extremely heated debates. And I think that, yeah, there definitely need to be some really good, sensible books out there that might help young people navigate things that are changing a lot and feel comfortable about themselves and who they are and not be judged. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking this, Liz, is that I do have a friend that I support who has autism, and he identifies as gender non-binary, and we've had some really great discussions about this. So there must be lots of young people out there who are looking for inspiration.
Yeah, so I would say there's a book that's just come out called What's the Tea? Is it called What's the Tea? It's by Juno Dawson. So I would maybe have a look out for this book by Juno Dawson, and see if he might be interested in it. I've not read it yet. I don't know if Eve has or if she's even disappeared, because I'm not sure what happened to
Hello, I'm still here.
Oh yeah, there you are. But that might be a good start. There's also a book, again by Juno Dawson, called This Book is Gay, which was written a few years ago. So I think the new one probably supersedes that. But yeah, there are books out there, there are conversations happening. So yeah, I wish him well.
Eve, have you got any more comments? I think there's a new message in the chat, but whilst I'm looking for that, oh yes, sorry, that's just reiterating. But I think we had some people join late and didn't actually realise the title of the book. But Eve, let me come back to you and see if you've got any more observations.
Oh, I've just seen a question actually. It says, "Would I like to see my book televised?" So I will just answer that. Well, that's an easy one. Yeah, writers always want to see their books televised. Yes, I think it would be incredible. I'd love to. I would love to. Emily Winsnap books have had an option on them for 12 years. No, gosh, it's probably about 14 years now, which means that there's been a producer trying to make a film out of them. They're on their fourth different producer trying to turn them into a film. So it takes a long time. But Paddington went, I think it was 50 years between the first Paddington book coming out and the film. So perhaps one day when I am my daddy's age, maybe it'll happen. Don't know. We'll see.
So we've got a comment from Peter Brook, and I'm not sure the background to this, but so I just read it out. He says, "Have you ever met Edmund de Waal? And what do you think of his device to tell the story of his family in Vienna and Paris through the Japanese Netsuke collectibles in the hair with the amber eyes?"
I haven't met him, no. And out of all the books that I have read on the Holocaust and on the subject, which I spent a year reading nothing but, I'm really ashamed to say this, I haven't read The Hair with the Amber Eyes. And I think my dad's going to tell me off because I'm sure you told me to read it ages ago. So I apologise for that. So I can't really answer that question. Why did you have that book?
I would only add
30 others and I could have answered you very intelligently.
Yeah, I would only add that I'm looking forward to reading yours, but it's a really powerful, I've read it during lockdown. It's a really powerful story. And Edmund de Waal, I've seen a video of him going back to Vienna, going back to his family's house that is now a different kind of building, but it's very powerful and worth reading.
And I agree. I've suggested that everybody reads it. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why I've had a blind spot. I apologise. Yeah. Sorry.
Thanks.
I have another question. Before I was kicked off because of the internet. So I obviously I do the press for organised press interviews for Liz, but Liz, I've stuck you in front of cameras and made you write articles. Have you enjoyed enjoyed sharing the story through those interviews as well as writing the book? Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, I've absolutely loved it. And, you know, it is a privilege. You know, getting a book published is a privilege, and working with people like yourself, Eve, and everybody at Simon & Schuster, and having the opportunity to do these things is a privilege. You know, one of the high points was going over to Southport, where my dad and I did 2 TV interviews in the park, and my sister came to watch us, and, you know, we were allowed to do it because, because it was work, whereas, you know, we wouldn't have been allowed to even take it at that point. And then, you know, having the things that came out of that, you know, all of us in the family had people, my mum's had people contacted, my dad's had, I think we almost got into a competition, like people who'd contacted us, you know, how many years had they come out of the woodwork from? And I think Dad won with someone getting in touch after 70 years, which obviously I couldn't compete with at 54. But yeah, the people who have, I think I've enjoyed doing the events, but I've loved the fact that people have come out of, oh, somebody got in touch with me the other day who works at the place that my dad worked at in his 20s, and, you know, and someone else got in touch with me with a story of their own. And, you know, the things that have come out of these media experiences have been amazing. Yeah, I've loved it. Yeah, I've loved it. Thank you. I don't want to say it in the past tense. I am loving it. Let's hope there'll be much more.
Well, Liz, Eve, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Eve, for conducting that conversation, despite the technical glitches and working through it. Zoom sometimes just works wonderfully, and other times it's a challenge. But we've had great interest today. We've had a lot of people in the room. So I just want to thank you once more, and we'll look forward to sort of putting links about the book and about the teacher's pack. Send that to us, and we'll put that on the website, and people can refer to it. So thank you very much. It's been great having both Harry last week, but putting your book in context, because if you've been to both of the events, it's been fascinating to read and listen about the stories that you've both got, both the fictional stories and the real life stories. So thank you to everybody for coming this morning. We'll be back to our chat, which is led by one of the group next week, and we'll be having another very interesting talk next month again. So thank you to everybody today. Thanks to Liz, thanks to Eve, and we'll see you all 10:30 next Tuesday.
Right.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
Right.
Take care.
Bye.